It's March, it's spring training, and it's time for Extra Bases with Bristol and Booth. Jeremy Booth is with me. And Jeremy, back in Houston, I see.
Yeah, man, back in Houston and could not be happier about it to get home. Bernie's happy. I'm happy. Enjoying the last 24 hours. Excited to get back.
This time of year, what does that mean for your schedule in terms of player evaluations and getting ready for your events and things like that? What does it typically mean for your life?
March is usually when we turn attention international. So our guys in the national side, they'll start going to Dominican and Colombia. We have somebody in Panama right now, and start building that side towards the World Combine. Because of COVID, we have some events around the country that are later than usual for the high school side on the U.S. side. So, we still have several of those to get through, 4 or 5 over the next 2 months. Next month in April, we'll have some staff meetings, here in Houston, of course, not anywhere else like Boston. We'll do it in Houston, and we will then go from there into the summer. And the summer this year is pretty full. So there's a lot to prepare for.
On the Major League Baseball front, the Astros getting some potentially bad news, and it appears it is bad news. Framber Valdez, fractured left ring finger, which is on his pitching hand. To me, Framber Valdez was actually one of the most important players that the Astros have this season, because I don't think they really have a true ace at this point. And he was a guy I was thinking he could potentially move in to that number 1 starter role.
Yeah, he was very impressive last year, right, in 2020. Looking towards 2021, especially with Verlander not healthy, and some of the holes they've had through departure, he was a big piece. He is a big piece of this rotation. Pretty good breaking ball. Let's just get it out there. Pretty good breaking ball in an age of 4-seam pitches. A curveball is a 4-seam pitch, and swings that are more lift oriented. The ability to throw that breaking ball in and out of the strike zone is an equalizer. And with the Astros now not having him, that creates a bigger hole, not just because of the ability to get through the lineup a couple of times, but the consistency and the weapon to protect his fastball. So it's his ability to fill that role was a big deal for them as they go forward.
I know you're not a doctor, but what kind of stress does pitching put on a ring finger with the repertoire that he has?
So, got a baseball here, happen to have one. So you got this baseball, and I'm right-handed, so I'll do it that way. And you kind of hold it like that. And if you see the ring finger over here, it's on the side of the ball, right? So every pitch he throws, he's going to have this kind of a guide hand. It's not pressed against it, but it is touching. It's a kind of a guide hand to keep the ball true out of his fingers. Now, for somebody that throws a curveball, right, and you spin, see that right there? That's going to be a lot of pressure. Even if you pull that way, you pull down, it's going to have a lot of extra rotation and vibration on that finger. So he's not going to have any feel to kind of guide the baseball out of his hand. That's going to be a problem. And that's why they're saying that he's not going to be able to pitch. It's a longevity. It's got to heal. And these fingers are so small. The bones are so small. It's not an easy thing to heal. You have to watch it, watch how it goes. You have to monitor it. It could heal funny. So it's really, for him, it's really important because of the fastball curveball combo.
This is a big deal when you're dealing with those little bones in your finger. Would you be surprised if it takes months upon months and he's not back until, say, the end of the season, or misses the entire season?
Well, the first answer is yes, because it's a finger, right? You think that's going to get back. The second answer is, as you say that, the second answer is no. And here's why. You have a 2020 season nobody's ever experienced. That's just never happened. So how they prepared for that season was also a first. How they come off that season into this year is also a first, right? How they stretch themselves out, the type of innings he would have been able to give them anyway. And then, of course, the nature of how it's going to heal, right? You're talking about a fast spinning 4-seam and curveball. You're talking about a 4-seam fastball and curveball. You're talking about, the necessity of that finger specifically for what he does. And if it doesn't heal right, it could take a while. He also has to work himself back into it, into pitching shape again. And the earliest I could see him coming back, if he's out 4 to 6 weeks to heal and then 4 to 6 weeks to ramp up, because he's got no spring training now, right? It's 3 months from now. So you're looking at the All-Star break at the soonest. If it goes beyond that, well, we might miss all of 21, but I would say the All-Star break at the soonest is about right.
And that's bad news for the Astros because they're kind of thin, I think, in the starting rotation. Yes, they have a lot of arms that they can run out there, but at the same point, you have McCullers, who, of course, health is always a concern with him. You have a Zach Greinke who's no longer the Zach Greinke he once was.
Right.
And after that, you have a bunch of question marks, I think.
Yeah, you got a bunch of kids. I mean, the kids stepped up last year, and we talked about how integral they're going to be to this team's success, but they're still new. They're still new. This is really going to be their second time through the league, is what that's going to be. And we all know the adjustments that come, whether you're on the mound, whether you're at the plate, the second time through the league. For me, what the Astros need to do is pick up the phone and call Jake Odorizzi. And he's a guy that comes into the back of the rotation. He's traditionally now, last couple of years, been a 5-inning guy, but it's enough of a veteran presence who's kind of been there, done that he can do what Jeff Supan did for those Brewers teams back, in the mid to late 2000s. He can do what guys like do to stabilize a rotation, even if he slots in as your 4 or 5. And you never know. Maybe he's had some time to recover last year off that same 60-game stint that everybody had. Maybe his offseason went well. He's the type of guy I'm calling right now and getting in here in the uniform as fast as possible.
And another thing when it comes to these young kids, and Martin Maldonado mentioned it to me during last year's playoffs, the fact that there were no fans in the stands was a huge benefit to those young pitchers. Yes, I know it was a huge benefit to the Astros as a whole,
Sure.
But when you don't have to deal with that extra element, that was huge for those guys, because it's enough to be in those pressure-packed situations. But when you've got tens of thousands of people screaming at you, that was a huge, huge deal for these young Astros pitchers last year that they didn't have to deal with. And part of this whole process, I think, is they're going to now, if things kind of get back to normal, they're going to be going into that lion's den in places, New York, Boston, some of these other places where, that becomes a major, major factor.
Yeah, especially because last year was the year that the fans would have been, let's just face it, especially harsh, right? Because of this coming off the sign stealing scandal. They got a chance. They had to do that remotely. It's pretty safe. They're not going to do that remotely this year, even if it's in smaller numbers. So there's a lot these guys haven't seen yet. So, not just the fans in the stands. And, I'm kind of reminded of For Love of the Game, with Billy Chappell. I can always tell when I'm in New York, clear the mechanism, right? And everything goes silent. Like, you have to learn how to do that. That's not always the easiest thing in the world. So it's going to be interesting to see how these guys respond the first part of the year. That's for sure.
And now there's a new report out that 2021 will not feature the universal DH, nor will it feature expanded playoffs. These are two topics that likely will become a big part of the next CBA. From a player's perspective, I think universal DH is very important because it's 15 more jobs, if you will. However, I don't think the players are willing to accept 15 more jobs at the expense of losing all those playoff dollars. So for me, I'm just that really could drag things out, I think, but we'll see.
The universal DH, it's not something I ever thought about until it was brought up. It's always kind of accepted. The American League is this way and the National League is this way. It just makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense for the action in the game. It makes a lot of sense for pitcher health. It makes a lot of sense.
I don't want to see pitchers batting. I'm tired of seeing. Now, Zach Greinke, it would be, Zach Greinke's thrilled now because one of his goals, I think, for his career is to get 10 home runs and 10 steals in his career or something like that. So he's thrilled that he can go into a National League ballpark and hit. But I pitchers hitting, no, I'm done.
Well, outside of Madison Bumgarner and Zach Greinke's a different bird, right? So we'll just kind of go with that. It's just better for the game to be more consistent that way. It just is, and the players want it. And again, pitcher health, which in an age of pitching with intent at every single pitch, it has to be protected. That's just a way to kind of reinforce what they're already doing. To hold it hostage for expanded playoffs don't make any sense. It has to be some kind of status for making the playoffs. You can't just go ahead and have 20 teams out of 30 make the playoffs. I know.
But it does make sense because the owners get most of that money. If not, I don't know the percentages, but they get a ton of that playoff money.
Yeah, to me, there's got to be some kind of incentive to actually get there. We're talking about an age of tanking. We're talking about an age of rule changes now, trying to make the game more exciting because we've changed how we played it. To me, this is just another one of the unnecessary tinkerings done by the commissioner's office. And I'm not trying to indict what they've done. I know they've done some good stuff along the way, but I got to tell you, a lot of these changes, a lot of this fan disenchantment, a lot of the player labor, unrest, if you will, a lot of the disconnect with the ownership has come under Manfred's watch. It's not a secret that we're still trying to find different ways to hold things hostage. It's good for the game to put the universal DH in, put it in, and stop talking about expanded playoffs because the owners are making enough money. That's fine. They're fine with that. They're good.
But I'll say this. The Astros better be on top of their game because they snuck into those expanded playoffs, helped them last year. They're not going to get that benefit this year.
Yeah, last year, Jay, makes sense. I mean, 60 games, you don't know what you got. I mean, you got to open it up a little bit. I mean, that's not a problem. But this year, we're back to a regular season. We've already moved the start of the AAA season back a month, right? So now you've got the alternate sites coming back into play. That's related to COVID for sure. It's related to social distancing to some degree in spring training. It's related to player health and again, because nobody knows what's happening off last year's training. We don't know. We have to kind of see what's going to happen. So that makes sense. But with that, the expanded playoffs it needs to go away. Let's take the training wheels off and let's go back and play baseball. And let's kind of get back to a game that looks like doesn't reward people for tanking, right? And getting in at 78 wins. Let's make this a bit more competitive.
One thing that had Astros Twitter ablaze was the talk that the Astros have moved one of their prized prospects. I guess you could argue he arguably could be their top prospect. Pedro Leon, the outfielder from Cuba, whom they've signed for between $3 and $4 million, that they're also trying him at shortstop. That got Twitter excited because I think some people thought, well, there goes Carlos Correa. That means he's gone too. It certainly doesn't. But the one thing that I kind of struggle with this, when I see guys being tried at other positions, and yes, I know versatility is really important, but sometimes like my first inclination is maybe this guy isn't as good as they thought he was. And that's why they're trying him somewhere else to maximize their return. Am I wrong in saying that?
From a club standpoint, that's a lot of money to pay. In the international market, that's most of your budget, right? So if you're going to pay that much money in most of your budget, you're doing a position change, it means you missed on your evaluation. That's what it means. 100%. How you evaluated that player was wrong. Now, it doesn't mean that the player isn't good. It just means that what you thought he was, he's not. He's not what you thought he was, right? It has nothing to do with Correa. The Astros have 4 different guys that can play short. For Astros fans out there, if Carlos Correa departs and goes somewhere else, which he's made it pretty clear this is where he wants to stay in Houston, as has Lance McCullers, as has Jose Altuve, which is why he signed it, as did Alex Bregman, right? If Correa is gone, your shortstop is Alex Bregman. So it's not like it's something where you have to worry about Carlos Correa leaving. I don't see that happening. I think the general manager, James Click, and I think Jim Crane, will do everything they can to keep him here. I think that's a Carlos Correa decision. And if he wants to stay here, he's going to. The proof in that is that last year when players had to step up and speak and kind of be the leader of the franchise, it was Carlos Correa that did it, even ahead of Jose Altuve and Alex Bregman. So they're kind of building this kind of confidence around Carlos where they're planning for him to be the face of the franchise as they go forward, along with Bregman, along with Altuve. So I wouldn't necessarily worry about that. But I think from a scouting standpoint, it's another miss by the Astros department. Not that he's not a good player, not that he doesn't have impact, but that's an unnecessary move. So they just kind of missed on their eval about him being an outfielder.
Am I being too harsh? But it seems again that because it's happening so soon, that's what kind of strikes this as odd, really odd to me, especially when, outfield is a position, and I know you don't draft in baseball, you don't draft for need, you just stockpile as much talent, but outfield is a position that really this team needs some depth and needs guys who who can be impact players, and to try him out at shortstop, it just doesn't make much sense to me.
Well, we have, this is the first full year, and I know we say last year James Click was here for the full year, but he wasn't. He had his hands tied on staff, and he won't say it, and he's not supposed to say it, and good for him because he's been nothing but professional since he's been here, and nothing less than expected coming from Tampa Bay and the influences of Bobby Heck and Eric Neander and the way they run things over there. But this is his first year of being able to see what he can do. Right? You had COVID, you had a shortened season, you had a new manager who's done a great job himself. You had a veteran core that had been around that kind of had to be navigated through what they had come off from that off season. During that time, though, it gave James Click and his staff, the few guys he was able to get in, the ability to kind of assess what they had. And so now I think you're seeing changes in the front office, right? We've seen some of that. We've seen Kevin Goldstein depart. And take up a new, I don't know if you want to call it a job, but take up a new position on Twitter, absolving himself of any wrongdoing. Anyway, but you've got that with Kevin Goldstein. You've got a different face now. James is doing different things. So it makes sense that they will be assessing the system, moving guys around. The one thing that I would say about the farm system, besides the fact that Luno and Elias and company did a terrible job in the draft,
that it's barren. That it's empty.
Is that they also signed a lot of guys that were replaceable. That's what they did. Is guys that are replaceable. It's kind of the same thing again and again and again, based on the analytic model instead of the scouting model. So I don't know how much that extended to Pedro Leon. I know that what happens now is that Click is going to be much more scout oriented, and they're going to get back into really centering the player in a future role. So that's going to happen, and that's probably what happened in this process.
So should I bother bringing up Korey Lee, the first-round catcher from Cal, who many consider to be the ultimate reach, has also been trying to play different positions: first base, third base, left field, according to reports out of the ballpark of the Palm Beaches. I know someone who we both scratched our head when that pick was made, but to me, that again, the guy that popped in my head was Taylor Ward, the catcher from went to the Angels.
They went to Fresno State, and the Angels took him in the first round. I'll never forget that one because I was like,
everybody was like that.
Yeah, I mean, but in our room we had a guy who really, really liked him. And he was making the pick.
Didn't like him at that position, didn't like him at that draft position, right?
No, he liked him, and I did it, and I was like, "What?" I mean, that was me. I was like, "What are we doing?" The Angels took him, and he's a big leaguer, but he's had to move around and play different places, and I think he's actually swung the bat better than I thought he was.
He's a third baseman now. He's not a catcher.
Yeah, he couldn't catch. So, Korey Lee, if you have the clip, it'd be great to go back and take a look at that if you have the clip at some point. I'm sure about how we reacted when he was selected. I'm laughing because I remember saying at the time, "What are we doing? Like, what are we doing?" It's not surprising that you take your first rounder, and it was Mike Elias, right? And it was Gross. It was Chris Gross, right? Who said all these glowing things about him behind the plate. And we talked about upside down profile. We talked about it was power, no hit. We talked about it was throw, no catch. We talked about that. It makes sense to move into a corner if you can't catch. Right? You've got other guys who can receive in the system, like Scott Manea, by the way, whose defensive metrics are and just raw ability with his skill advancement is ahead of where they've allowed him to play. He's in big league camp. He's a guy that's going to hold his own. He's like a Carlos Ruiz type of player, right? He's going to be in that mold. So if you got a Korey Lee, he can't catch with those guys. You got to figure out where to play him because you wasted your money. That's also why he was paid so much less than the other guys in the first round, because not only did the Astros have no idea, and let me say this for those in the back that can't hear it, no idea what they are doing in the draft under the last regime. Zero. Okay. Now you have to move your first rounder 2 years in to a different position. That's a whoops. If you keep
not just one position, 2 or 3.
That's a big whoops. That's a whoops we missed, right? And we got that with now Leon, and we got that with Korey Lee. And I know I
don't know about Leon yet. I'm not willing to go that far. I'm just saying that idea popped in my head.
Position change. We're talking about, and the funny thing is, if you allow me 5 seconds, we're talking about we've been talking about the greatness of the Astros scouting department and player development department. I'm sorry, 2 of the highest paid guys you've had in the last 3 years just got moved. Help me with that.
How the international department has been excellent.
Yeah, I'm saying, but still in that process, we've whiffed. We've moved the guy we paid almost $4 million to a different position this quick. So we have some things that we have to kind of recenter, and there's nothing wrong with what the international department has done. Matter of fact, the guy that was at Oz Campo, right, who was leading it, he went to a different club. This isn't about Oz. This is about the guys who are making those decisions. And we got to get back to understanding that there's more to the game than just what his exit velocity is and his spin rate is. And that, I think, is what this regime is going to do, which is why these guys are moving.
I can give you an update on Taylor Ward. At the age of 26 last year, 34 games, OPS of 716, no homers, 277 batting average, and strikes out nearly once every game.
That's a miss. And look, let me be clear to those of you listening at home, watching at home, because I got to say this. Our job on this side is to put the lens on of what kind of big leaguer, what kind of professional they're going to be. They're not bad players. They're really talented guys to even get this far. They're one of the 1% of the 1% to play in the big leagues. Taylor Ward was drafted late in the first round and went out into a very, very bad system at the time and got through it and got to the big leagues. That's good for him, and he's a good player for doing that. Now, when you get to the big leagues, though, it's a different lens. It's a different figuring out of what he is, and he's just not a very good big leaguer. He is a big leaguer and should be respected as such, but he's just not a very good one. And so when you're talking about winning championships, you draft these players like a Taylor Ward or a Korey Lee. My question to you is, did you win a championship with those guys? Because if you didn't, you can take them in the 8th round, 10th round, 12th round, and they can still be the piece, the complementary piece that they might help you be, in the future. They're not the aircraft carrier you take in the first round. And that is where, if there's any place the Astros whiffed, any of the first round picks under Mike Elias, I'm waiting to show up and be anything. Any of them. And that includes Chris Gross too. Seth Beer, where's he? He's no longer an Astro, right? Corbin Martin was a second rounder. He looked like he had a chance to be pretty good. Okay.
Apparently the reports out of Arizona hitting 97 this. Yeah. He's going to be the best of the bunch.
Good arm, right? I mean, we took
Davey Bakauskas.
Oops. Okay. I mean, let's just keep running down the list. I mean, there's nothing these guys have done in the draft to get credit for what they did. They just took credit for everybody else's stuff. Okay.
So they'll take credit for Bregman, though.
They can take credit for Bregman, which they fell into because of the whiff on Brady Aiken. Let's not forget.
I know. Listen. It's the only. It's one of the few teams I've ever seen whiff on 2 number 1 overall draft picks.
Oops. Right, Mark Appel making sandwiches. It's a good sandwich, by the way, but that's what he's doing. So we got to get back to this. Isn't about that. It's in the past, but we're still dealing with what they left. And I could have sworn while you and I were getting some hate mail. What was that? Oh, was it somebody was bitter? Was bitter? No, it wasn't bitter. It was basically that it's called being right. It's not being bitter. It's called being right. They didn't do anything in the draft. It's not very good. This is your product. This is your product. James Click has to do what he can to win with the club he's got, add some free agents, and find a way to rebuild the system, which is why you're going to see a revolving door in that scouting department right now as these guys come out and the other guys come in, because you got to get better. Can't do this a second time in a row.
On that note, that's it. And on that note, it's another edition of Extra Bases with Bristol and Booth. 3 topics, Jeremy. That's all we had. And I don't know how long we went, but we went a long time. See you next time, Jer.
Got it.